All right, welcome back, everyone. Happy Sunday to you all. This is Joseph T. Henley Middle School in for Unit 5. We do have quite a lot of guests and observers today, so those of you who are not speaking, please make sure your cameras are off and that you remain muted during the entire presence as we're going so that we can enjoy what your colleagues have to share with us again today. So my name is Mark McCall. I'm still your timekeeper and facilitator from yesterday. If it's okay with you, we'll stick with the green background for your 1-minute time warning and then your yellow background for the end of time notification at 4 minutes and 8 minutes. And with that, I'm going to mute myself and hand it over to the judges. Good luck.
Thank you and good afternoon, everybody. It's good to see you all. I think I told you yesterday, my name is Lindsay Draper. I am currently Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the Institute for Wellbeing and Law. My colleagues on the judging panel today are.
Hi, I'm Candida Steele, and I still am Candida Steele. I've retired as a judge on the Civilian Board of Contract Appeals, and glad to see you all again.
And good afternoon, and thanks for coming back. We're so excited to be with you again. My name's Rebecca Tinder. I'm a retired attorney from Charleston, West Virginia, and the West Virginia We the People coordinator.
Could I impose on you to introduce yourselves and tell us who your teachers are?
Hi, I'm Audrey Miracle. I'm an 8th grader at Henley Middle School. I'm very excited to be here again, and our teachers are Miss Boshane and Miss Curry.
Hi, I'm Isabel Brand. I'm also in 8th grade and also from Henley Middle School.
I'm Ollie Nacy, and I'm really excited to be back again. Hi, I'm Margaret Lee, and I'm really excited to be here.
Good.
Great.
Okay. So the second question in Unit 5 is that political and social movements in American history have been successful because of the right of assembly. President Abraham Lincoln wrote in a letter that the right of peaceable assembly is part of the constitutional substitute for revolution. Do you agree or disagree with President Lincoln? Why? What is the history of freedom of assembly in America? What historical or contemporary evidence is there, if any, that political and social movements have led to significant changes in laws or policies? What limits, if any, should be placed on the right to freedom of assembly? Begin.
President Lincoln was accurate in saying that the right of peaceable assembly is the constitutional substitute for revolution. If successful, peaceful assemblies can encourage government officials to take action against various problems. Peaceful protests are a sign of growth, seeing as they have helped to turn our country into what it is today. An example is the women's suffrage movement, which led to the 19th Amendment being ratified. The problem with peaceful assembly comes when the line between what is and isn't peaceful is strained. An example of a protest that turned violent is the January 6th Capitol riot. While it's generally agreed that the riot was violent, some claim that they were simply exercising their constitutional right to assembly. Situations like this are why we need to have a more precise and widespread separation between peace and violence and between fact and opinion.
The history of freedom of assembly began and only grew with a number of flaws visible in the American government that the people wanted to change. The case Edwards versus South Carolina in 1962 is a good representation of substituting revolution with peaceful assembly. The Supreme Court ruled that the state infringes students' right to free peaceful assembly as stated in the First and 14th Amendments, that Congress shall make no law abridging the right of the people peaceably to assemble. The case Hurley versus Irish American Gay, Lesbian, and Bisexual Group of Boston in 1993 solidifies that the law cannot violate free speech for an anti-discriminatory assembly within a private organization. The cases Cox versus Louisiana in 1961, Lloyd Corporation versus Tanner in 1972, and Madsen versus Women's Health Clinic in 1992 all enforce the locations and times that are appropriate to assemble. Additionally, all laws that restrict freedom of assembly cannot be vague. As a result of the freedoms written and how they are interpreted, the Supreme Court will have to enforce and interpret the Constitution in many different ways.
Over the course of our nation's history, there have been many political and social movements that have brought forth changes in laws or policies. The women's suffrage movement fought for women to have the right to vote through conventions, protests, such as the Women's Suffrage Parade in Washington, D.C. in 1913. They eventually succeeded in 1920 when the 19th Amendment was passed. Similarly, with their protests, marches, and historic events such as the March on Washington, the Montgomery bus boycott, and Bloody Sunday, the Civil Rights Movement made tremendous changes in the United States. The 24th Amendment was ratified, and 2 years after the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed, the amount of registered Black voters in America had increased to 54%. While progress has been made, the Black Lives Matter movement, as well as the March for Our Lives movement, show that there is more to be accomplished by social and political movements in our country.
Peaceful assemblies are protected by the First Amendment, but if they turn violent, law enforcement has the right to stop the protest. This being said, assemblies are a way for people to express their emotions towards something they might believe is unjust. We shouldn't silence voices just because we disagree with what they stand for. In the 1937 case of DeYoung versus the state of Oregon, the Supreme Court reversed a conviction made on Dirk DeYoung, who had been convicted of teaching communism to a gathering of people. The Supreme Court stated that the holding of meetings or peaceable action cannot be prescribed, recognizing how important the right of free speech was. There are certain ways to keep the court from being biased in limiting assemblies that are protected by the First Amendment, one being the three-pronged test outlined by the Supreme Court in the case Ward versus Rock against racism. If a restriction needs to be made, it must follow the three prongs. The regulation must be content neutral, it must be tailored to serve a governmental interest, and it must communicate the speaker's message. To the Supreme Court, it's important to protect our rights to assemble, also recognizing its limits.
All right, thank you. So I have a question that comes out of your citation of many marches and positive ones. One of the ones that I recall the most, or well, I shouldn't say recall, I'm not that old, but that I think of a lot is in the mid-1920s, when as a result of large number of immigrants coming to our country from Central and Eastern Europe, the Ku Klux Klan staged a couple of massive marches in Washington. Is there a way that other citizens can respond to large protests that don't involve disruption or violence? How do you, a protest that you find abhorrent, how do you respond? Do you understand my question, what I'm asking? Okay, so is there a way for citizens to respond to protests like that that are anti-immigration, anti-Central and Eastern European without acting violent? How do you respond to that?
In the modern age, people could use social media as a way to respond without having to go to make a counter protest, which, as we saw with Charlottesville in 2017, led to more of a violent turn. They could go onto social media and post information regarding how they disagree with the group, or some factual evidence about why they disagree with the group.
So social media and counter protests. So you gave me two right there. Okay. Anything else come to mind? Because if not, that works for me. Okay, thank you.
Great. Okay, so you said that you made a quote that laws can't be vague. Can you expand on that? Laws that are about protests and assembly can't be vague?
So there have been many cases that the Supreme Court, like in Virginia versus Black, have ruled that laws prohibiting actions, including assemblies, free speech, that are vague are unconstitutional because they can be applied and take away First Amendment rights that shouldn't be taken away. And so being very specific with the law that is prohibiting certain kinds of assemblies or speeches or just First Amendment rights in general, having that be specific is required for it to be constitutional.
And that's what the amendments are for. The original First Amendment is very vague. and it's generalizing a lot of speech, and a lot of assemblies. And as we've grown, we've added on to that, and we've also added on to and changed laws. Well, not changed, but we've added to and added laws with the amendments.
Okay.
Okay. In the Dijon case that you mentioned, the Supreme Court held that a freedom of assembly was as important as freedom of speech. Do you agree or disagree, and why?
I would agree with the Supreme Court on that because freedom of speech and freedom of assembly are similar in different types of ways. If you're assembling, then you can also assemble with a voice. You can say, like, when people are usually assembling, they shout certain things that align with what they're assembling for. So they can, if it was like, for example, the Black Lives Matter protest, they were peacefully walking through the streets while shouting Black Lives Matter, and that's a freedom of speech, and they're both important in certain ways.
And adding on to that, like a lot of times, when there are problems with protests, even when they are in practice peaceful, is what's being said at the protests. And usually when people get upset about something, it's hardly ever about the physical act of grouping up. It's why and what they are saying there.
But, you know, we can say all we need to say without getting together. We've got all kinds of ways to make our voices heard with social media and petitions and letters. Why do we need to assemble?
In my opinion, voices are more powerful when they're all together, and it just creates a bigger sort of impact if a lot of people are joining together and saying the same thing and standing for the things that they all stand for.
Going off of what Margaret said, I agree. And we saw with the Women's March in 2017, about 4 million people showed up on January 21st in DC, and about 41 million people worldwide joined in protests similar in 30 countries in all 50 states.
When there are actual physical people going to a location to protest, it makes a physical representation of how many people they are that believe this thing. If it's just over social media, it's very hard to get a representation of how many people are really saying it, because just like saying a number without having something to compare it to, a lot of times doesn't make that big of an impact. But when you can see all of these people together fighting for something, it creates like a visualization of it, and it makes it into something that people can see as real instead of just being something that people are talking about on social media.
I'm just curious, is there any issue right now that you feel strongly enough about that you're prepared to protest about or march or assemble about?
There are so many things that I agree with and disagree with. In this current times with the pandemic, I'm not comfortable going out and assembling physically, but via social media, I would completely. But I also think that at my age and with my experiences, knowing more about the topic and researching it and helping to fund ways to stop the problem if there is one, like Sea Shepherd, and helping with making sure that fishermen aren't fishing in illegal spaces. And so I strongly agree with them, but I don't plan on getting on a ship anytime soon and going and ramming into other ships.
A protest or assembly that is very recent that I would actually join is the Stop Asian Hate movement that is going on currently. As an Asian myself, I have experienced discrimination out in society, and what they're standing for, what they're protesting for, is something that I would gladly join. So.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay, never mind.
No, Ollie, no. I want to hear it.
And adding on to that, like there are so many protests that I would 100% join. Like Margaret said, stop Asian hate, climate change, LGBTQ plus rights, all of these like things that need to be protested for. But I feel like, as Isabel said, with COVID, I feel like I'm just like not properly equipped to go and do a physical protest right now.
Good. So let me tell you, and Ollie, I'm really glad you did say what you had to say, because you did what I think needed to happen. Is first of all say there are a lot of considerations that people have to have in going into deciding whether to participate. Safety is one. And if we had a lot of time, I would tell you how over the years, safety is what people thought about when they and their children participated, for instance, in civil rights marches. That, you know, are my kids safe? Clearly, we all have to be worried about the pandemic, but we also have to be worried about whether that will be allowed to shut down improvements and changes in our country. So I very much like the fact that you kind of summarized all of those issues. You all did a great job, not only in your initial statement and outlining the important cases and talking about, you know, I would have been very disappointed if I hadn't heard about women's suffrage. Obviously, you got to talk about the civil rights movement. Makes me happy to hear people talk about March for Our Lives, because that, you know, that's your generation and happening now. So you touched on so much of what I think was necessary. Really pleased to hear the Stop Asian Hate cases mentioned, because, you know, it becomes very easy for us in this country to get very parochial and forget, you know what, we're all citizens and we all have to watch out for each other. So I was really pleased not only that Margaret spoke up, but that she had a teammate say, by the way, me too on that one. So you all were really a pleasure to listen to, and I thank you and congratulate you.
And I just as much enjoyed it just as much. What I thought was interesting, one of the things that I wrote down was that you said, "What is peaceful?" And I thought that was a very interesting thing to say, and that the purpose of protest is to encourage the government to do something that you want them to do. You cited the cases in 1992. I appreciated the laws can't be vague. That was a good point to make. Bringing up the Charlottesville protest, the Ku Klux Klan or the white supremacists in Charlottesville was very good. I also very much appreciated you bringing up the 2017 Women's March. And I do so, especially that you said there were 40 million people around the world. And I was in London at the time, and I marched in London. So that was really fun to hear. Thank you. I think you did a really wonderful job. Clearly, you understand the principles that we're trying to get you to know about here. And you're also clearly enthused and engaged, and have fun in your future, because you're going to be getting out there and saying what you think without fear or favor, I hope. And as I said yesterday, I hope you all will represent us. And when we're no longer able to represent you, we'll be very happy when that day comes. I'm not sure my generation has done what we needed to, so I'm looking forward to yours. Take care. It's a great job.
Congratulations again, and good job to both you and your teachers during these very difficult times. We're so grateful for you sticking it out and participating in this, because it is great fun. I echo the comments of the co-judges, and I particularly liked in your 4-minute presentation the struggle we have with not only peaceful protests and where to draw that line, but also the struggle we have with fact versus opinion. and where we draw that line. You know, I couldn't agree more that we are having a difficult time with that in these recent days. I, of course, love that you brought up the Dijon case because it was my prepared question that I had planned to ask. And so I was able to follow up on that. And I was glad that you knew about that case. I think you clearly got the points about when we create these laws that they have to be specific enough to put the people on notice of what is acceptable and unacceptable behavior. So not being vague is a very important concept that you highlighted in your follow-up question and answer. And the impact, the visual impact that one has when there's actually an assembly. And we've seen that most recently with all of the protests. The media will cover large crowds and we will see large crowds. And I agree with you that visual impact has an impact and maybe causes more people to come out because there are people out there and they feel more comfortable going out in large numbers to show their support for these things. Great job. And I enjoyed the conversation. Sorry it couldn't go longer.
Thank you.
Thank you, team. Thank you, Ms. Corey and Ms. Beauchesne, for all of your hard work. We appreciate it. Students, good luck as you move forward with your studies and enjoy the rest of your Sunday.